pushed so much in our current culture when women do start having their children and they realize that they actually do want to stay home with these children and that their job is to nurture, and they desire to be a mother that is very present and involved with their children. They're wondering, okay, we've been living off of two incomes for a while. How am I going to transition to living off of one income? And here are 5 ways that women can transition to living off of one income in your household as a family. Let's talk about it. Number 1 is going to be downsize your standard of living. This is probably going to be the easiest way that you're going to be able to transition to living off of one income, but it comes with a lot of responsibility and it comes with really a lot of intentionality in order to do this. I mean, if you are willing to downsize your standard of living to live off of one income, in many cases, for many women, this may look like, in many families, this may look like a drastic cut. And so because of that, not all of the same expenses that the couple was spending together can be utilized. They don't have the money anymore to spend on a lot of those expenses. And for many, many people, this looks a lot more drastic than just, we're going to cut out a little bit of our food budget here and our childcare budget obviously will be cut out, but we're also going to cut out, maybe a little bit of our excess expenses or fun trips or vacations. For most families, especially nowadays where women can be very high earners who want to stay at home, but they're cutting out a significant portion of the family economy and income at that moment, it can feel like a very daunting task. And most people would sit there and they would say, it's impossible, I can't do this, we've lived off of these two incomes for however many years and it's impossible to do this, and so I just have to suck it up and go back to work. I would encourage you, if you can in any way, if it's actually a priority to you to stay at home with your babies, transitioning to one income will look big and it may look radical, but it absolutely can be done. And for some people, it looks like for them moving to a different city, maybe moving to be near relatives, or even moving just to downsize either the house that they're in or going back to renting some sort of apartment. I have heard of stories of women and families really who they went from living in this nice house in this nice area and they drastically downsized their lifestyle in order to afford to have the wife stay at home to nurture and be there for her children and her husband and her household. But for them, it looked like literally going from a full house down to an apartment, and especially during those young years of their children's life. Now, eventually, obviously, they built back up. The husband really stepped into his provider role, and then they eventually were able to then buy houses and continue that. But in those young years, they did live a lot more frugally than they had before. This is one big reason why I really, really encourage you, if you are a woman listening and you aren't yet pregnant, you aren't yet ready to have kids, I don't care where you are in life, at some point, most likely for most women, you're going to get to this point where you will want, most likely, to stay at home with your children. And you're gonna feel like you're not able to do it because of your current standard of living. So if at all possible, if you are already, you're not pregnant yet, maybe you're just married, maybe you're not married yet, if at all possible, prepare for the future by saving, by living off of one income for as long as you can, and just using the second income that the wife may be making to save or to pay down debt or to use for some other purpose rather than your lifestyle. Because if you can do that, you can completely eliminate this step. And that would be so beneficial for so many women. And I know that many, many women have had these testimonies where they really wish that they could go back and have done that. And so if you are in that state and you're like, you know what, I don't ever want to be at home, or if you're in a state where you do want to be at home, I would still encourage you, whether you're in either of those camps, have it as a possibility open in your mind. Be living frugally enough that you can cut back on some things to live on one income if you have to, and really just be saving that income as much as you possibly can. Number 2, focus on getting debt paid off as much as possible. This is something that my husband and I personally really have tried to do in our early marriage, so that way when I do stay at home and am a full-time stay-at-home mom, we will not have debt. And having that allowance in our life allows us to be so much more free in our budget financially from month to month. It allows us to save money for purchases like a house or cars. And it really will allow us to still live a reasonable lifestyle into the future, while also understanding and getting rid of a lot of the payments that can hold over you for so long. Most people don't understand the sense of freedom that comes from being debt-free. And I know that there are so many people who, they follow Dave Ramsey's plan to become debt-free and they work towards that for years. But if you are at a stage where you are pregnant or you're trying to become pregnant, helping yourself out to encourage perhaps you to be able to stay at home. And if your husband isn't on the same page, then paying down debt too will help bring him on the same page, because then there's not that monthly payment that you're constantly stressing over that you have to worry about. There's not that interest that you're having to pay out and pay out and pay out. And so because of that, you have a lot more freedom in your finances to be able to move things around, to be able to go back to step number 1 and downsize if you need to, because there's not debt in your budget. And because of that too, you have a lot more room to be able to save in your monthly budget when you're living off of one income, because you've paid down that debt. And so that debt is no longer under your responsibility. And so you have that money to be able to adjust the budget as needed a little bit and save, so that way you can feel like, okay, we're still saving for a house. We're still saving for these big purchases. We can continue to save for these things because we've paid off this debt and we have this margin in our monthly budget. 3 is set aside an emergency fund to cover expenses. Now, really ideally, most financial experts will tell you to set aside that emergency fund either right after you pay down your debt or part of it before you pay down your debt, depending on who they are and what they're talking about. And so maybe this isn't the 3rd step that you do. Maybe this is something that, you do while you're paying down debt or whatever. But if you have an emergency fund, when those hospital bills come or there's an unexpected thing that happens with your child or with your newborn or something goes awry, you have that emergency fund as security to know that, if my husband loses his job for 6 months, right, we're covered because we have that 6 months saved up in an emergency fund, so that way we can actually cover these expenses and you don't have to feel as financially drained and constantly like, oh my goodness, are we gonna make it through this month? We're here living paycheck to paycheck type of deal. But you can sit there and be like, we can calm down if my husband needs to take time off for a back injury or something that happens. We have money in our savings to cover that. And so having that in the back pocket or just in some sort of savings account is very, very beneficial. I'm going to take a pause here to recommend a high yield savings account. A high yield savings account is literally an account that has a much higher yield, so a much higher interest rate than other savings accounts. We currently have a savings account at Ally, or perhaps they call it Ally. But with that account, we get a pretty good interest rate. I believe right now it's 4.35, but obviously that interest rate varies. But because of that, we can put our money in there, and every single month we actually make money on the money that's in there. And it's not something like, oh, I got 17 cents. When we put our emergency fund in there, we actually continue to make money off of what's in there. And right now for us, we are making over $100 each month just from the money that is just sitting there in some of our savings funds. And the cool thing about Ally is they allow you to put each of your types of savings into buckets. And so you can literally put like, okay, this is for my emergency fund money. This is for our house fund money. This is for our baby fund money. Whatever the case might be that you're saving up for, you can create those buckets in the high yield savings account with that Ally account. So I will leave a link in the description so that way you can get up to $125 of a cash bonus from Ally for creating a savings account with them. Once again, I highly recommend it. There's really nothing you have to lose if you have money that you're able to put in a savings account right now. Very least, even if you can only put $100 or $200 in there, is not gonna make you millions or make you hundreds or even make you tens of dollars every month, but that is going to be making you much more than having it in your checking account or just a regular savings account. So I would highly recommend it. Click on the link in the description to get that $125 cash bonus so that way up to $125. It'll probably depend on how much you're able to put in there. But that will hopefully very much benefit you as a place that you can store your emergency fund, and it's super accessible, and then you can just transfer the money to your regular checking if you have an emergency. Super quick. It takes, maybe a day or two to like process, but as long as you can cover whatever the expenses immediately and then transfer the money and you can pay it off right then. Transition to part-time work if there's no other option. So say you've gone through downsizing, or maybe you're so downsized, you're like, you know what, we are literally living as low of income as we can. And, we've tried to get our debt paid off. We've tried to save up this emergency fund, and we have some money there, and we have some of our debt paid off. But number 4 is transition to part-time if there's no other option. You're like sitting there and you're like, I really don't think there's going to be any other option than to work part-time. And maybe you have a mom or a mother-in-law who could watch your baby while you are working, or you have a job from home. Now, this may or may not be the case with me, but I currently work from home. And so once I do have the baby, for a couple of months, I may have to transition into part-time work before I'm able to fully be a stay-at-home mother. But we'll see where we're at that point. I would highly recommend that this is kind of a position that you take if there's no other option. Like I said, like you have tried to do everything else and the budget just won't work. It won't add up. Maybe your husband's making well below the poverty line or the whatever the average income line is. And so you're just like, I don't think we absolutely can't do this. Part-time can be very beneficial. It'll still allow you plenty of time to spend with your young babies, but still bringing in that paycheck. Or another option too is if you transition to part-time work for a season and then you are able to cut that out and be fully a stay-at-home mom. And so I know that some people have had stories where because of medical debt or like this big thing happened and they weren't able to stay at home fully, but they were able to have this part-time job that they had for maybe a year or a couple of months, and then they were able to transition out of that and then be fully stay at home because of the circumstances of that season. And so see if this is an option at your work. If you have a mother or a mother-in-law around or some people from church that you know that you can watch your children part-time, where you wouldn't necessarily have to send them to daycare or hire a nanny to do so, that could be a beneficial place for your situation. And number 5 is look for virtual work for a season. once again, if your goal is to become a stay-at-home mom, you probably aren't going to want to work long term. You know, the goal is for you to stay at home. For our family, that's the way it is. The goal is for me to be a stay-at-home mom. Like I said, I've had a virtual job for the past however long I've been working since I graduated college. I don't know, a year and a half or so. But that job has allowed me to be much more flexible with my time. And it allows me to, you know, if I need to stop during some part and tend to the baby or tend to something else, I'm able to do that. Now, the hard part about this suggestion is not everyone's work is completely able to be virtual. So this is really hard for some people because they're sitting there and they're like, oh my goodness, how am I going to work virtually? I can't do it. I would encourage you to try to seek out options that you may not necessarily like, or ways that you can make money online that you may not have necessarily thought of before. I will say it can be very hard to find virtual work unless you are in some sort of niche that where you know someone who knows someone type of a deal. But I would encourage you, this is your time to get on LinkedIn, to talk with people and be like, hey, do you know of anyone? Talk with your connections, whatever field you're in, try to figure out a way that you can work from home, ideally for a season. If your ultimate goal is to become a stay-at-home mom, you just want to be able to do this for a season, but virtual work could be a good opportunity for you so that way you're able to still at least have a small handle on the things that are going around in your house and be able to watch, you know, your new children. Or perhaps even if you are just a wife and you're like, I need more time, I want to nest and set up my home and we want to have children soon, and you're thinking forward in these conversations, it might be a good idea to get a virtual job at this point and then have that option open to you for once you have children. I hope that these 5 ways helping women transition to living off of one income was beneficial to you. I really do hope for items 4 and 5 that those are absolute last ditch options. If you are looking towards being a stay-at-home mom, start thinking about these transitions now. If you are before you're pregnant, that's even more awesome. And I hope that those 5 items that I mentioned are helpful to you. If they are not, I am so sorry. Stop. If you are enjoying this content, I would love it if you could go ahead and click that subscribe button and give this video a like if this is something that you are enjoying. I talk about intentional living rooted in God. Thanks so much, guys. Don't forget to share this episode with a fellow single or mom or wife friend who you think could benefit from the information in this YouTube video, so that way we can get as many people this knowledge as possible. I truly appreciate you being here, and I am so excited to just continue to hear stories that you might have of how you can transition to living off one income. So be sure to leave a comment letting us know your story.